Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Adrian Pandev, business and immigration attorney, and today we're going to talk about the E2 investor visa. Specifically, we're going to talk about the eligible countries, or I should say, citizens of countries that are eligible for the E2 visa. As background, the E2 visa is an investor visa. It is based on an investment treaty between the United States and a foreign nation. So only citizens of countries that have a treaty, an investment treaty with the United States, are eligible for an E2 visa. So before you dive any further and explore this E2 visa as an option for you, the very first thing you got to do is make sure that your country of nationality, your country of citizenship, is actually eligible for it. So how do you do that? Well, we have an article on it. It should be in the description. But most importantly, and this is what you should do, go to the State Department website, and it lists all the E2 countries, right? And not only that, it also lists the duration, right? The duration of the visa, how long it's valid for, and how many entries are allowed with that visa. So let me explain this a bit further, because first thing you got to do is make sure your country of citizenship is on the list. If it's not, you won't be able to pursue the E2 visa. The second thing is, right, look at the duration. So to give you an example, right, many E2 visa citizens of many countries are eligible for an E2 visa that has a maximum duration of 5 years, right? So in those cases, right, you can use the visa to enter the US for those 5 years while it's valid. Now, some other countries, right, the visa will only be valid for a few months. 3 months is fairly common, sometimes a year, sometimes 2 years, right? And that makes a big difference because once it expires, you have to renew the visa. So if you have a business that's going to require a lot of traveling back and forth internationally, well, maybe the E2 visa is not the best option if you're only going to be able to use it for 3 months and then have to reapply for a new visa every time through the consulate, right? The other thing you got to pay attention to is the amount of entries allowed, right? So many countries are eligible for what's called a multi-entry E2 visa. So what that means is you can kind of come and go as many times as you want. But some other countries, the E2 visa will be limited to just this one single entry, or a few, say 3 entries. So to illustrate this with a hypothetical, right? Say you're going to have to travel 3 times back and forth during the summer internationally, right? If you have a multi-entry E2 visa and it's valid during the duration of that entire period, well, then you can go ahead and exit, enter all 3 times, and there should be no issue. However, if your visa only allows you, let's just go forward, one single entry, well, you won't be able to come and go, exit and enter as many times as you want, right? So it's going to be ineffective. So to wrap this all up, basically, you got to look at are you a citizen of a country that's actually on the list? And 2, you should look at the amount of entries allowed as well as the duration of the visa, because these 3 things together determine whether it's a viable option. One other thing I wanted to say is, if your country is not on the list, right? If you're a citizen of a country that is actually not on the list, that doesn't mean you should quote unquote give up hope, because the list changes. Portugal is a recent addition. There's always discussions with adding, other countries. So, and this has to do with U.S. foreign policy and treaties with foreign nations. So, if your country is not on the list, doesn't mean it won't ever be. And similarly, if your country of citizenship is on the list, doesn't mean it always will be there, because treaties also end, right? So the bottom line here is double check and make sure, right? Just sort of a little bit of background about the E2 before I go into let's call it an FAQ. I've got a couple commonly asked questions. So E2 visa, I think, is arguably the best option for anyone starting a business, any foreigner starting a business in the US, right? It's specifically geared to individuals and companies that want to expand to the U.S. and grow a business in the U.S. It requires a substantial investment. So the best way to think about this is you open a company in the U.S., you register a company, you capitalize that company, right, with sufficient funds, and then you use those funds to invest in what's necessary to get the business up to an operational state. Once the business is close to operational or already operational, you can go ahead and apply for the visa. You will have an interview at which you have to explain the investment and everything that was done and what the business plan is. And if everything's successful, it's approved, you get the visa and you can enter and start directing and developing this business. Now, the questions that I get very, very often are the following. What if my country is not on the list? Well, believe it or not, most of you watching this probably fall into this category simply because some of the world's largest countries are not E2 countries. So think China, India, Brazil, etc. These are not E2 countries, right? So in these cases, like I said, you would have to see if something changes or explore alternative options. The L1 is one we use very frequently. My country of birth, Hungary, is not on the list, and we use L1 visas for most Hungarians looking to expand into the US because we can't use the E2, at least at this time. It might change, by the time you're watching this video. Similarly, in many other countries, because it's not an option. But in those cases, summarize it quickly, you got to look at alternatives, L1, O1, H1B, and others, right? And I will try to shoot videos on all of those so you have more, information. The second question I get very often is, what if I'm a dual citizen? What if, I'm a citizen of, let's just say, Canada, which is an E2 country, and let's just say India, which is not, right? Well, in that case, you can apply for an E2 visa. Yes, you can, because you're a Canadian citizen. You can use that second citizenship to apply for the E2 visa, right? Follow up to that I get very often is, okay, well, I'm a citizen of a country that, has the E2 visa available, but I don't reside in that country, right? So just to continue with that example I had going, I'm a citizen of Canada and say I live in South Africa. South Africa is not an E2 country. Well, the question I get is, can I still apply because I live in South Africa? Am I allowed to apply at, say, the Johannesburg consulate? And the answer is yes. There's one exception. I'll go through that in a second. But generally speaking, yes. As long as you hold this citizenship, the E2 citizenship, you're able to apply in your country of residence. We see this very often. We've applied for several E2 visas in Johannesburg, like I said, in South Africa, in Hungary, like I said, Brazil is another common one, and many others, frankly. So that is not an issue. However, you gotta be careful with the exact treaty that your specific, nationality has with the United States. The example is the United Kingdom. And again, these things could change, so always double check. But the United Kingdom actually requires that you be domiciled in the UK before applying for this visa. So unlike many other countries, if you're applying based on UK citizenship, United Kingdom citizenship, you got to make sure that you meet that domicile requirement. And anyway, there's a lot of strategies on how to address it and how it can, how this can be addressed. But again, just once you've identified, which country you're up at the basis, right, which country you're applying based on, just double check and make sure you have a sound strategy and make sure there's no extra requirements like in the case I mentioned. Similar question to this that I get very often is citizenship through investment. So basically, many countries, maybe not many, a few countries in the world you're basically able to obtain citizenship by making an investment into that country's economy. You are able to use that passport. So a common one we see is Grenada. There's other ones too, right, depending on when you acquired the citizenship. But basically, if it was through investment and the citizenship you acquired through investment is an E2 country, you're eligible to apply. However, you have to have resided in the country of citizenship you're using for at least 3 years in those cases. So just make sure. I know many from countries that are not E2 eligible realize that this is a great option to start a business in the US. And then they see, oh, well, what if I, acquire citizenship through investment in one of these other jurisdictions? That is great, but just make sure that you realize that there's also this domicile requirement for 3 years. So you can't just acquire the citizenship through investment and then never actually live in that country or have no documentation to prove that, and then apply for this E2 visa. Now, final question that also comes up, and it's kind of similar to this. What if I am a citizen of an E2 country, but I'm from an overseas territory, right? So this, very often we see this with, again, United Kingdom, France, the Netherlands, etc. Again, it's treaty specific, and it's very specific about where you live, right? Which overseas territory. Generally speaking, you should be able to qualify in most cases, but it's very, very fact specific, because each and every territory is treated differently depending on the treaty, right? So if you are from an overseas territory, just make sure, be aware that you need to double check whether or not you're eligible for the E2 treaty. Generally speaking, you should be. The majority are, right? But there are exceptions, and that's why you got to be careful. I could make a whole video about the exceptions and all of that, so I don't want to go into all of this here. Sort of to wrap this all up, I love the E2 visa. I think it's one of the best options to start and grow a business in the US. However, you got to be from a country that's eligible for it. So start your journey with the E2 visa by checking whether or not you are eligible. Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe and like. It really helps me, and I will try to continue to post more of these videos that I hope you find helpful. Thank you.